Australian workers, Australian crews, being marched off a ship so that they could be replaced by workers from overseas in an Australian port. You would not have thought this was possible, except it has actually happened. It is a cowardly act, and it's an appalling way for any company, and indeed the Australian government, to permit. The Liberals often, you see them in press conferences, they have flags, lots of Australian flags. They can't seem to get up in the morning without a flag near them. The problem is, when it comes to the red ensign, they don't seem to want to fight for that flag, and that's a disgrace. Labor does not support what is going on with Australian merchant shipping. We understand the fundamental value of having an Australian-flagged merchant marine. Now we've got laws that this government are bringing in which allow overseas flagged and crewed ships to undercut Australian operators on our domestic sea routes. Laws designed to remove Australian workers and Australian conditions. There is no level playing field when you have a government doing this. Malcolm Turnbull has a plan to take down the Australian flag on all of our domestic sea lanes, and he's running up the white flag on jobs. Now, we will stand against this, the Labor Party. We will call it out as wrong. Now, we are not being militant or radical for doing that. We are doing the day job that Australians expect. The laws that the Liberals made, Labor has voted against because they made no sense. They're purely ideological. The Liberal Party assume that because seafaring happens beyond the shoreline of the Australian continent, that somehow it's out of mind, out of sight, and that no one cares. Well, we promise you that we do care about it. I understand, through family, through history, through economics, and just through sheer old-fashioned decency, the power of having an Australian merchant marine. I mean, if you move freight by train in this country, the train driver should be paid Australian wages, operates under Australian workplace standards. The rail sector is subject to these standards. If you move freight by road, the driver's paid under Australian laws with Australian conditions, and the industry has to adhere to Australian safety standards, including, for example, maximum number of hours without a rest. But if you want to move freight on coastal routes, then I submit that the same standards should apply as would apply to other forms of transport. Australian wages, Australian conditions, Australian safety standards for stevedores and for ships. It's not just about the economy either, is it? It's about our environment. Since 2004, Australian inspectors have detained 122 foreign-flagged oil tankers because they've been overloaded, they've been using defective equipment, they've had a serious deterioration in the integrity of their hull that's deemed to be a risk to their seaworthiness. 122 foreign oil tankers. In that same time period, not one Australian-flagged oil tanker was detained. And if that doesn't convince you, think about 2010 when the Chinese-registered bulk carrier called the Shorten 1 ran aground near Rockhampton, 10 kilometres away from the shipping lanes. Now, under law, there should have been an Australian pilot on that vessel, but there wasn't. The mariner in charge had little knowledge of Australian conditions and even less sleep because he wasn't held to Australian safety standards. He was later sentenced to 18 months in jail for negligence. But the Shorten put a hole in the Great Barrier Reef, 3 kilometres long and 250 metres wide. It spread an oil slick over 3 kilometres of ocean. Now, Australia holds the Great Barrier Reef on trust, not just for the future generations of Australians, but for the entire world. It is one of the planet's great treasures. And it's one of our nation's great drawcards. It generates nearly $6 billion a year in revenue from tourism. It supports 65,000 jobs. If we loosen our safety standards, if we reduce the seaworthiness of vessels off our coast, then we are putting the reef, its environmental and economic benefits at risk. We fought these laws. We've managed to defeat them in the Senate for now. But you can bet that the Liberals will keep trying on this because they are hung up about Australian seafarers and the MUA.